Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for coming to my presentation tonight, even when it is so cold and windy. Let me start by admitting how honored I am by the invitation from one of the Ontario's leading universities to this prestigious annual memorial lecture. It is an honor one can hope for but cannot ask for. I sincerely thank Raj Jain and Nicole DeRosers not only for inviting me, but also for allowing me to choose a non traditional topic for this presentation. They have worked very hard for this event. As you know, tonight I am questioning Jainism's validity in today's world. I am asking, is Jainism suitable for the 21st century? Why am I asking such a question? As a trained scientist, I am rather curious because Jainism is more than 2600 years old and the 21st century is just barely 14, a teenager. Naturally, when technology is coming up with new ideas every day, I'm wondering if this teenager will care for any ancient ideas at all. Let me surprise you. However, before before we do that, we must first define these two terms, Jainism and the 21st century. Jainism is easy to define. We have its long history. But how can we define our teenager century? The only sources we have so far are some conflicts, triumphs, and some world events we have witnessed together in the 14 years of this century. Nevertheless, these events are already setting a trend, and future generations will use these events to remember us as a people of the 21st century. Here are some of the trend setting events of the last 14 years. I'm sure you all do remember 9/11. This century started with a terrorist attack on America. It killed thousands and destroyed New York's iconic Twin Towers. You also, of course, remember a recent attack on our parliament in Ottawa. Do you remember the schoolgirls, 200 schoolgirls in Nigeria abducted by a Nigerian terrorist group? Those girls are still missing and their mothers are still crying. And of course, no one will ever forget what is happening in the Middle East. A terrorist group called ISIS, this jihadist group started from Syria, have occupied nearly two-thirds of Iraq, and on their way, they have destroyed towns and villages and indiscriminately killed thousands of civilians, men, women, and even little babies. Their ghastly acts include beheading people and proudly displaying their horrifying grisly acts on television and websites. One wonders what is happening to humanity. One wonders if such events are the forewarnings of a war, a 21st century World War III, perhaps between the two major religions, Islam and Christianity. Judged by all these events, we can say that fundamentalism and violence is rapidly rising all over the world. I have been worrying and thinking about these events. This century is much troubled like a teenager, and I worry that it will continue to be on its reckless path of self destruction. Our young men and women are increasingly disillusioned, afraid, and fed up by the direction in which 21st century is going. There are many men and women here tonight whom I would consider to be young. Well, younger than me anyway. That's probably all of you. Therefore, please allow me to say on your behalf that we are fed up. We are fed up with never ending wars and violence. We are fed up with ever increasing fundamentalism. We are fed up with the traditional power politics of dominance. We are fed up with environmental degradation, and we want to bring back an era of human happiness, social justice, and peace. Good. We, we all are concerned that the direction in which we are headed today will have dire consequences. Whether our concerns are real or imagined, the fact is that the future looks bleak if we continue on this trajectory. But wait, there are some events that are hopeful. Events such as thousands of young men and women have occupied Central Square in Hong Kong to save their democracy. Their sit-in is called Umbrella Revolution. Their revolution continues, but a replay of Tiananmen Square style massacre is still possible. Hundreds of young doctors and nurses have signed up and are now working with Doctors Without Borders to serve Ebola patients in Africa. And more and more young volunteers in almost all countries are now joining NGOs such as Greenpeace, Sea Shepherd, Save the Trees, vegetarian associations, prevention of cruelty to animals, and so on. They are struggling for social justice and rights of all living beings, and a global revolution is on its way. Here are some pictures of young volunteers for an organization called Sea Shepherd. Their mission, motivated by their conscience, is to save whales and dolphins from slaughter. There is arrest and even death at high seas for such compassionate acts. Their leader, Paul Watson, a Canadian, is banned by Harper government from returning to Canada. Such events give me hope. I find some hope in today's young generation. And of course, hope is always better than fear. Today's young men and women want change. They want to get involved to find a solution. They organize street demonstrations, occupy squares and buildings, brave rough seas, hug trees, and face bullets. They are trying various approaches to change the course of 21st century, but get frustrated because nobody seems to care. They don't know which way to turn. Fortunately, unlike 1960s flower generation, they are not dropping out. I personally feel that they are on the right path. They are not aware that they are on a spiritual path. Yes, their sit-ins, their demonstrations, their entire movement, and their goals for a better tomorrow are spiritual. I believe that their whole struggle is spiritual because it is motivated by their inner voices, the voices of their soul, their true spirituality. Let me give you an example. I remember watching 1989 sit-in by thousands of Chinese youth in Tiananmen Square in Beijing. Their communist government killed hundreds of youth in that square because these youth wanted democracy. The military had even ordered a tank battalion to crush the demonstrators. However, the demonstrators were not in any mood to end their sit-in. As the tanks rolled in, a young demonstrator rushed in front of the tank, daring the driver to crush him. Surprisingly, the driver stopped and turned to avoid the young man. But the demonstrator also turned and ran into the path of the tank. The driver changed his path repeatedly, but the demonstrator also followed. Finally, the tank stopped and the driver came out of the tank apparently to join the demonstrators. What do we conclude from this? A young man risking certain death for democracy and freedom, and the truck driver also ready to face a firing squad for disobeying. Why? How do we explain this death wish? I think the answer lies in the fact that both of them were following the call of their untainted natural spirit. Theirs were spiritual acts. I feel that this was a supreme example of today's emerging spirituality. After all, what is spirituality? Is it obeying God, scriptures, pundits, and priests? Is it going to a temple or a church or a mosque? Is it the rituals that we perform? What is it? Think about it. I define spirituality simply as living by inspiration of our untainted natural spirit. Let me repeat it. Spirituality is living by the inspiration of our untainted and natural spirit. Remember that human spirit by its very nature is kind, compassionate, and merciful. It is called our conscience. But our conscience is often suppressed by our tainted spirit that has acquired biased ideas, habits, and brainwashing. I feel that our youth want to live a peaceful and conscientious life, a true life to their natural spirit. In fact, they want the whole world to live like that. Their struggle is to usher in a new era of living by peaceful and compassionate means. I really hope and wish that this time they will succeed. Unfortunately, their sit-ins and demonstrations alone are not enough. Their entire movement needs an unified direction. Their goal is revolutionary, but to succeed, they must find a way to bring about a revolutionary change in the mindset of the entire global population, including yours and mine. They need popular support. Only then will their efforts and sacrifices make our world safe, compassionate, and conscientious. How can they generate worldwide support? Is it possible to change the collective mindset of the masses? Or is it the pipe dream? Is it just a pipe dream? Can the entire society, the entire world be turned around? My answer is yes. Yes, it is possible to change the global mindset. Nelson Mandela, Nelson Mandela, Martin Luther King, Mahatma Gandhi, Christ, and Mahavir, the 24th Guru of Jainism, have done it. Yes, it is possible. We must learn from these past achievers. Mahavir discovered the technique of mass appeal and used it to turn the mindset of a very large population away from violence to create a peaceful society some 2600 years ago. Yes, it is possible. All these individuals turned their world around to their own spiritual calling. They each carried the torch all alone and succeeded in changing their contemporary societies. Luckily, now the whole generation of our youth are ready to carry the torch, and the past achievers can guide them. This is where Mahavir's know-how and his philosophy, the philosophy of Jainism, becomes relevant. Let me explain how Mahavir did it. It could guide us all. Mahavir's genius was to identify the key elements of untainted human spirit, and his technique was simply to appeal to those spiritual elements, the conscience of his listeners. We do not have time to review all of Mahavir's work, but we will focus on just three key elements of human spirit that Mahavir used. Those elements became the three main principles of Jainism. They define Jainism even today, and they are known as Jainism's three R's. Mahavir's three R's are really simple. They are respect all life, respect all viewpoints, and respect the environment. Let us examine these three R's in the context of our 21st century's situation. For example, the first R, respect all life, that is non-violence. Mahavir's compassion included all living beings, not just humans. Plants, animals, insects, even bacteria included. Respect and honor life, period. Furthermore, his focus was not just on our actions, it was mainly on our spirit. He maintained that unlimited compassion, perception, knowledge, happiness, and freedom are the innate qualities of a pure soul. Let me repeat it: unlimited compassion, perception, knowledge, happiness, and freedom are the innate qualities of a pure, untainted soul. Our daily life must reflect these qualities, even if our tainted soul has only limited amounts of those innate qualities. Therefore, he defined violence in a very much wider sense. Next slide, please. Look at Mahavir's definition of violence. Remember, I said he focuses on our soul, not only on our actions. According to him, any act, intentional or not, that violates our soul's innate quality of compassion is essentially violent. He goes on further to describe violence by giving some examples. Next slide, please. Here are some of the examples of our violent acts. Telling a lie is violence. Exploiting other living beings is violence. Depriving someone of his livelihood or legitimate rights is violence. Ignoring the pain and sufferings of others is violence. Next slide, please. Here, Mahavir focuses on our violent thoughts, not just actions. Treating other lives as inferior is violence. Denying education or knowledge to someone is violence. And wishing ill of another living being is also violence. On social issues, Mahavir's definition of violence is poverty, child labor, and discrimination based on caste, color, or gender are all acts of violence. A society that tolerates such behavior against its own people or other living beings is a violent society. Think about it. Let us now move on to his second R. His second R is based upon the fact that all of us are born with tainted soul. Consider, for example, Bible, which says, "For all have sinned." Romans 3:23. Because we are born with tainted souls, our knowledge and perceptions are also tainted and limited. These limitations allow us to perceive only some facets, while others may perceive totally different facets of the same multifaceted truth. Next slide, please. Mahavir explains why we should respect all viewpoints by calling it anekantavad. Truth is multifaceted, and no living being can perceive all its facets. Therefore, rather than fighting over who is right and who is wrong, we should listen, carefully analyze different viewpoints, and try to get closer to the absolute truth. Let me tell you a story to explain Anekantwad. I remember the story my mother told me when I was just a little boy. The story of three blind men and an elephant. When these men had an opportunity to find out what is an elephant, one man went forward with his hands raised and touched its body. With joy, he shouted, "Indeed, an elephant is like a wall." The second man touched elephant's trunk and said, "Nay, nay, nay. An elephant is just like the tree trunk." "Both of you are wrong," shouted the third man. "An elephant is like a rope. It wiggles like a snake. I'm holding it in my hand." Now tell me who was right. They all are, but only by their respective perceptions. No one has the whole truth. This story is repeated in Jain literature again and again. Anekantwad is a unique Jain contribution to world peace. It fosters respect for those who hold alternate beliefs and reduces the potential for dogmatism and fights. It is a practical tool for interfaith dialogue, mutual respect for different viewpoints, and to avoid conflicts. Would you not agree with me that understanding and the use of Anekantwad on a global scale would have avoided and could yet avoid all wars started in the name of religion and self-righteousness? Mahavir has used this tool to convince many warring kings to stop war. Jains have 2600 years of history, of peaceful history, to prove that. Let us now move on to the third principle of Jainism, namely respect your environment. Environment has become a fashionable word just recently. Nevertheless, Mahavir was already talking about it some 2600 years ago by preaching that air, water, and our earth are all living systems. Man will abuse them at his own peril. All living systems are interdependent, and our survival depends on the survival of all. He put that in three words in his language: Paraspar Upagraho Jivanam. Our Jain friends probably would know this phrase. He asked people to reduce and minimize their wants and needs and called this principle as aparigraha. He argued that ego, greed, and wants encourage us to buy more, possess more, show off more, accumulate more, and destroy more. In modern sense, this is consumerism. It results in industries producing more, using more resources, polluting our environment, and increasing the gulf between rich and poor people and nations. When Mahavir started preaching, the world around him was full of violence, wars, and animal sacrifices. Therefore, his spiritual message of 3 R's readily resonated with the conscience of his listeners, and people joined his movement in great numbers. A transformation in the mass psyche was taking place. Mahavir created a peaceful community of Jains by using his 3 R's. Mahatma Gandhi's genius was to use non-violence, Mahavir's first R, not only to awaken millions of his countrymen, but also to touch the conscience of his British rulers. And in more recent times, Martin Luther King and Nelson Mandela also used spiritual tools to galvanize their people. Their spiritual messages excited the hearts and minds of masses, and there lies the secret of their success. Fortunately, some Youth activists today have discovered this secret and have already adopted Mahavir's tools as new spirituality. I urge my young friends here tonight to take a note of this. Your goal is revolutionary and spiritual, but your struggle needs tools of mass appeal. Mahavir may have been the first one to discover and use 3 R's, but please do not limit these 3 R's to Mahavir only. These 3 R's are universal because they are the innate qualities of every pure soul. Therefore, feel free to adapt them to suit your needs and messages. Unlike Mahavir's time, you now have very powerful tools of mass communication. Your message, if it is right, can instantly appeal the masses in far corners of the world. How do you know if your message is right? Just consult your conscience. If your message is in conformity with the innate qualities of your untainted soul, it must be right. If not, more introspection may be needed. You can now join the revolution to bring a better tomorrow. A revolution without an acid test of spiritual conformity will be futile. Politicians will continue to shoot at you, corporations will ridicule you, religious organizations will ignore you, and masses will remain on the sidelines. Be proactive and lead your revolution with these tools. The consequences of not doing anything are likely to be very dire. The 21st century is your century. It will continue to be on its self destructive trajectory without your participation. To my friends here who are not so young, I plead that you give a helping hand to your children and grandchildren. You don't have to join the street demonstrations. You can be more effective if you studied Mahavir's know-how in greater details and informed the world about this practical alternative to the downward slippery path our world is headed for. Awaken your friends, neighbors, and colleagues, and pressure your leaders and politicians to support these young foreigners of the new spirituality. I would remind you that just like Mahavir's time, our world today is also full of violence, wars, and cruelty. In fact, our future may be even more bleak and scary. Therefore, people today may be more receptive to accept Jainism's triple R. This being a truly spiritual message, I will even venture to urge all the religious places, all temples, gurudwaras, mosques, synagogues, and churches of the world to adopt this message as their own, ring the bells, and preach this simple spiritual message to your worshippers. In conclusion, you will agree with me that Jainism is not only suitable but is also absolutely essential for the 21st century. I thank you all for being patient. You are such a wonderful audience.